At an exclusive gala dinner, a millionaire's elderly mother accidentally spilled wine across the pristine tablecloth. Seeing her as nothing but a burden and overcome with embarrassment, her son flew into a rage and slapped her in front of everyone. But he was completely unaware of who was watching, and soon he would bitterly regret his actions. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The sleek black limousine glided through the bustling streets of New York City, its tinted windows shielding the occupants from the curious gazes of passers-by. Inside, Julian Jules Sterling, a young millionaire in his early 30s, sat engrossed in his tablet. His fingers danced across the screen as he pored over company records. Beside him, his mother, Eleanor Sterling, a woman in her late 60s, gazed around the luxurious interior of the vehicle, her eyes wide with wonder. The soft hum of the engine and the muffled sounds of the city outside created a cocoon of silence within the limousine. Eleanor, unable to contain her excitement any longer, turned to her son and asked, "Jules, dear, where exactly is this gala being held?" Without looking up from his tablet, Jules replied coldly, "The majestic ballroom." Eleanor nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "This is the first time you've let me into your limousine, you know? I'll never forget this moment." She ran her hand along the smooth leather seat. "When did you get this beautiful car?" It took Jules a moment to respond, his attention still fixed on the screen before him. "I bought it 5 years ago," he said flatly. "My goodness, how time flies," Eleanor mused, her voice tinged with a hint of sadness. "We haven't done anything together in all that time. I've missed you, Jules." She reached out as if to touch his arm, but stopped short, her hand hovering uncertainly in the air before she withdrew it. "I'm so proud of you, you know. Look at all you've accomplished, a millionaire at your age. I feel honored that you've invited me to this important event as your guest." Jules remained silent, his fingers tapping away at the tablet. Eleanor, undeterred by his lack of response, pressed on. "What's tonight's event about, dear?" Finally, Jules looked up from his tablet, his expression one of barely concealed annoyance. "It's about visionaries and ventures," he said, his tone clipped, "to celebrate forward-thinking leadership, long-standing business alliances, and to acknowledge pioneers of tomorrow. It is essential I attend." He thrust the invitation at her. "Here, look for yourself. It's something you won't understand, Mom, so stop asking questions and just be quiet for goodness sake." Eleanor's face fell, but she took the invitation with trembling hands. Jules continued, his voice softening slightly but still carrying an edge of impatience. "I need you to behave tonight, Mom. I didn't bring you here to have fun. There's an important venture capitalist I need to meet, Alastair Finch. He's well known for valuing robust mentorship in his business management." "Oh." Eleanor perked up, eager to show interest. "And who is this Mr. Finch?" Jules sighed. "As I said, he's in venture capital and disruptive technology. He's about your age, early 70s. His protege, Damien Bell, who's around my age, will be there too. Damien is already deeply involved in Alastair's holdings and is set to take the lead in several projects." Eleanor nodded, trying to absorb the information. Jules continued, "That's why I decided to bring you. I want to make a good impression, show that we have a strong family. Even though Dad's gone, I need to network and conduct business with these important people for the venture to secure funding." He paused, then added with a hint of sarcasm, "Maybe you can charm the old guy, show the human side of our family. That's basically the point of tonight and why I need you here." Eleanor's heart sank at his words. "Jules, do you really mean that? Is that the only reason you asked me to come?" Jules's jaw tightened. "So what if it is? If you need another reason, consider it an opportunity to attend a high-class event, meet other wealthy investors, and indulge in fine food and wine." "That's not what I meant," Eleanor said softly. "It's just we haven't seen each other in years. I had hoped you asked me because you missed me." Jules's expression hardened. "I miss Dad," he said coldly. "Dad would know what to do at an event like this. He'd make the most of the opportunity. That's what I intend to do tonight." Eleanor fell silent, her son's words striking her like a physical blow. She turned to look out the window, blinking back tears as memories of her late husband, Arthur Sterling, flooded her mind. Arthur had passed away when Jules was in his late teens, leaving them with a considerable fortune. Still, Eleanor had struggled to manage the finances alone, relying entirely on what Arthur had left behind instead of growing it further. The ventures Arthur had worked so hard to build had nearly stagnated before Jules reached legal age and stepped in to inject new life and innovation. Guilt washed over Eleanor as she realized the strain in her relationship with Jules was largely her own doing. He must view her as weak and inexperienced, associating her with missed opportunities and lack of ambition. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. If there was any chance of repairing her relationship with her son, she had to do her best tonight. "All right, I promise to give it my all tonight," she said, injecting forced enthusiasm into her voice. Jules opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, the limousine came to a smooth stop. The chauffeur's voice came through the intercom. "We've arrived at the Majestic Ballroom, sir." The chauffeur swung open the limousine door, and Jules stepped out first, his polished shoes catching the soft evening light. Without a glance in her direction, he extended a hand toward Eleanor, his gaze fixed on the hotel entrance. She still accepted it gratefully, a flicker of warmth stirring in her chest despite his distraction. As she emerged from the car, a quiet gasp escaped her lips at the sight before her. A plush red carpet stretched from the curb to the grand entrance of the Majestic Ballroom. The building itself was a masterpiece of architecture, its facade adorned with intricate stonework and gleaming gold accents. Spotlights illuminated the scene, casting a warm glow over the arriving guests, many of whom were dressed in stunning gowns and impeccable tuxedos. Eleanor smoothed down her own emerald green dress, suddenly feeling self-conscious. She glanced at Jules, who was already scanning the crowd, his eyes sharp and calculating. Taking a deep breath, she placed her hand on his arm, and together they began to walk down the red carpet. As they approached the entrance, a distinguished-looking man in his early 70s stepped forward to greet them, his silver hair neatly combed and his tailored suit speaking of wealth and taste. Jules's posture immediately straightened, and a practiced smile spread across his face. "Mr. Finch," Jules said, extending his hand. "It's a pleasure to see you again." Alistair Finch shook Jules's hand firmly, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled. "Julian, welcome. I'm glad you could make it." His gaze shifted to Eleanor, and his smile widened. "And this must be your mother. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Sterling." Eleanor felt a wave of relief wash over her at Alistair's warm greeting. "The pleasure is all mine, Mr. Finch," she said, offering her hand. "Please call me Eleanor." As they exchanged pleasantries, Eleanor found herself drawn into the conversation. Alistair spoke about his journey in venture capital and his passion for supporting disruptive technologies. His words painted a picture of a man who had worked hard to build his success while remaining grounded in his values. "It's good to see entrepreneurs who still recognize the importance of generational collaboration," Alistair remarked, his eyes twinkling. "My protege, Damien, is here tonight as well. He'll be taking the reins on several projects in the coming year." Eleanor nodded, feeling a connection with this kind, insightful man. She remembered Jules's earlier words about making a good impression and felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps tonight wouldn't be as difficult as she had feared. "We look forward to speaking with you later about the future venture of Sterling Enterprises, Mr. Finch," Jules said, his tone professional but eager. Alistair nodded. Of course. We'll catch up after dinner. Enjoy the gala, both of you." As Alistair moved away to greet other guests, Jules and Eleanor continued towards the ballroom where the gala was being held. The red carpet extended into the hotel, guiding them towards the main event. Eleanor's heart swelled with pride as she walked beside her son, feeling for a moment like they were truly a team. But as they neared the ballroom doors, disaster struck. Eleanor's heel caught on a slight bump in the carpet, and before she could catch herself, she stumbled forward. Time seemed to slow as she fell, her arms flailing in a desperate attempt to regain her balance. With a soft thud, she landed on her hands and knees, her face burning with embarrassment. Mom! Jules hissed, his voice low and angry. How embarrassing, he muttered, just loud enough for Eleanor to hear, but not for others to notice. He quickly helped her to her feet, a forced smile plastered on his face as he glanced around to see if anyone had witnessed the fall. I'm so sorry, Eleanor whispered, her cheeks flushed. My heel caught on something. It's been so long since I've worn heels like this. Jules's grip on her arm tightened as he led her into the ballroom. Walk straight, he whispered through clenched teeth, and try not to embarrass us any further. Eleanor's heart sank as they made their way to their assigned table. She had hoped to make Jules proud, to show him that she could fit into his world. Instead, she had only reinforced his view of her as a liability. As they sat down, she vowed to herself that she would do better. She had to, for Jules's sake and for the chance to rebuild their relationship. The grand ballroom of the majestic ballroom was a symphony of elegance and opulence. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high, ornate ceiling, their soft light cascading down to create a warm, golden glow that danced across the faces of the gathered elite. The air was filled with the gentle murmur of conversation, punctuated by the occasional tinkling of fine crystal and the muted clink of silverware against bone china. Dozens of circular tables, each draped in pristine white linen that seemed to glow under the chandelier light, were arranged throughout the vast space. Despite the grandeur of the room, the layout created an atmosphere of intimacy, as if each table was its own private island in a sea of luxury. A waitress, her crisp black and white uniform a stark contrast to the colorful evening gowns and tuxedos of the guests, approached Jules and Eleanor with practiced grace. Her steps were silent on the plush carpet as she led them to their table, nestled near the center of the room. With fluid movements, she pulled out their chairs and waited for them to be seated before draping crisp, starched napkins across their laps. Good evening, Mr. Sterling, Mrs. Sterling, the waitress said, her voice pitched low to match the hushed tones of the room. A polite smile graced her features as she continued. We'll be serving dinner as the gala begins. For the main course, we have options for proteins and wine. May I take your selections? Jules, his posture relaxed yet commanding, spoke first. His voice carried the easy confidence of a man accustomed to such events. I'll have the seared tuna and a glass of Pinot Noir, please. Eleanor's eyes darted nervously over the menu, the unfamiliar dishes and wine pairings making her heart race. She cleared her throat softly before speaking, her voice barely above a whisper. I think I'll have the... Mom, Jules interrupted, his voice low but sharp, cutting through her words like a knife. His eyes, cold and disapproving, bored into hers as he leaned closer. We don't want garlic breath when talking to Alistair later. Choose something else. Eleanor's cheeks flushed with embarrassment, the heat creeping up her neck and face. She could feel the waitress's eyes on her, and though the young woman's expression remained neutral, Eleanor imagined she could see pity there. Swallowing hard, she forced a smile and spoke again, her voice trembling slightly. Oh, of course. I'm sorry. I'll have the filet mignon and a sparkling water, please. The waitress nodded, her pen scratching softly against her notepad as she recorded their orders. With a final, very good, sir, madam, she glided away, disappearing into the sea of tables and guests. As soon as the waitress was out of earshot, Jules turned to Eleanor, his expression stern, his voice barely above a whisper, but filled with intensity. Mom, I need you to concentrate and behave for just a few hours, he said, each word deliberate and weighted. This is an important business deal, and I can't afford any more embarrassing incidents. Can you manage that? Eleanor nodded, her throat tight, her hands twisting the napkin in her lap. Of course, Jules, she managed, her voice small and uncertain. I promise I'll do better. I'm just so glad and honored to be here with you tonight. Jules didn't respond. His attention was already elsewhere, his eyes scanning the room with the sharp focus of a predator assessing its territory. He seemed to be making mental notes, cataloging the faces and positions of various guests, his mind no doubt formulating strategies and potential conversations. Eleanor watched him, a complex mixture of emotions swirling within her, pride at her son's poise and determination wed with a deep, aching sadness at the distance between them. When had her little boy become this driven, successful, yet cold man? She longed to bridge the gap, to find some way to connect with him. Summoning her courage, Eleanor tried once more to engage him. "You know, Jules," she began, her voice soft and tentative, "I really am proud of all you've accomplished. Your father would be just. Stay quiet and smile until we're finished with the business deal later, Mom." Jules cut her off, his tone leaving no room for argument. His eyes, when they flicked briefly to her face, were hard and impatient. "That's all I need from you tonight." Eleanor fell silent, the words she had hoped to say dying on her lips. She folded her hands in her lap, trying to quell the trembling that had started in her fingers. As the lights in the hall dimmed slightly and the master of ceremonies took the stage to welcome the guests, Eleanor found herself retreating inward. The master of ceremonies' voice boomed through hidden speakers, filling the vast room with practiced enthusiasm. But to Eleanor, the words were a distant hum, overshadowed by the thundering of her own heartbeat in her ears. She focused all her energy on maintaining her posture, on keeping a pleasant, neutral expression on her face. She was determined to be the perfect, silent companion her son seemed to want, even as a part of her withered at the thought. As applause rippled through the crowd in response to something the master of ceremonies had said, Eleanor Sterling sat straight-backed in her chair, a study in poise and elegance to any casual observer. But beneath the surface, in the depths of her heart, she had never felt more alone. The weight of his expectations pressed down on her like a physical force, making it difficult to breathe in the perfumed air of the ballroom. The server returned to their table, moving with the silent grace of one long accustomed to navigating crowded rooms while balancing precious cargo. His tray, laden with delicate wine glasses filled with deep red liquid, seemed to float effortlessly in his practiced hands. "Your wine, sir, madam," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper as he placed the glasses before them. The wine was a deep, rich red, looking both inviting and somehow dangerous to Eleanor's nervous eyes. Jules's attention remained fixed on the stage, his sharp gaze focused on the speaker. His eyes were narrowed slightly in concentration, his mind no doubt already racing with potential business strategies and networking opportunities. He seemed oblivious to the server's presence, let alone to his mother's growing discomfort beside him. Eleanor, feeling the need to do something, anything, to prove her worth, reached for her wine glass. Her hand trembled slightly as she lifted it, the weight of the crystal unfamiliar and awkward in her grasp. Time seemed to stretch as the glass tipped in her hand. Eleanor watched, detached, as a wave of red wine rose to the rim, teetering on the edge before surrendering to gravity. A single ruby droplet lingered for a heartbeat, then fell, shattering the stillness. The liquid splashed onto the pristine white tablecloth, blooming into a vivid stain. Tiny droplets flecked Eleanor's dress, each one a quiet emblem of her failure. Eleanor gasped, the sound barely audible over the speaker's voice, but it was enough to draw Jules's attention. His head snapped around, his eyes widening in shock as he took in the scene before him. In that moment, Eleanor saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Disappointment, disgust, fury before his face hardened into a mask of cold anger. In a split second, before Eleanor could even begin to apologize, Jules's hand shot out. The sharp crack of his palm connecting with her cheek seemed to echo in Eleanor's ears, drowning out the ongoing speech and the ambient noise of the room. The sting of the slap bloomed across her face, hot and shameful. "You're so embarrassing," Jules hissed, his voice low and venomous. His words cut deeper than the physical blow, each one a dagger to Eleanor's heart. "You can't even hold a glass properly. You should have just ordered water, you incompetent." Eleanor's vision blurred with tears, her cheek burning from the slap, and her heart aching from the cruel words. She blinked rapidly, trying to stem the flow of tears that threatened to ruin her carefully applied makeup. The taste of salt mingled with the lingering flavor of wine on her lips, a bitter reminder of her failure. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling like a leaf in a storm. The lighting. I couldn't see well. I'll clean it up quickly in the bathroom. Jules's jaw clenched, the muscle twitching beneath his skin as he fought to control his anger. His eyes darted around the room, assessing whether anyone had noticed the commotion. Most of the guests seemed oblivious, their attention still focused on the stage, but Jules's paranoia was palpable. Fine, he spat, the word filled with barely contained rage, and call the waiter on your way out. I'm not going to call them and let everyone think I stained the tablecloth. Eleanor nodded mutely, pushing her chair back as quietly as possible. The soft scrape of the chair legs against the carpet seemed deafening to her ears. As she stood, she noticed the deep red stain spreading across her lap, a visual representation of her failure. The beautiful emerald green dress, chosen with such care and hope for the evening, was now ruined, much like her relationship with her son. I'll let the server by the door know about the spill, she murmured, her words barely audible. She made her way towards the exit, her steps unsteady, feeling as though every eye in the room was upon her, even though most guests remained focused on the ongoing presentation. The plush carpet seemed to shift beneath her feet, making each step a challenge. As she passed the server station by the door, she leaned in close, the scent of his cologne mingling with the lingering aroma of spilled wine. I'm so sorry, Eleanor whispered, her voice choked with unshed tears. But there's been a spill at our table, table 18. Could someone? The server nodded sympathetically, his eyes kind. Of course, madam. We'll take care of it right away. Eleanor hurried out into the hotel corridor, her cheeks burning with shame, her heart pounding in her chest. The cool air of the hallway was a shock after the warmth of the ballroom, raising goosebumps on her bare arms. She was so focused on finding the restroom, on escaping the scene of her humiliation, that she didn't notice the man who had been sitting at the table behind them following her out. As she neared the bathroom, a gentle voice called out, stopping her in her tracks. Excuse me, madam. Are you all right? Eleanor turned, her heart leaping into her throat. The man who had addressed her was tall and distinguished, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners with concern. His tuxedo was impeccably tailored, speaking of wealth and taste. She recognized him as the one who had been seated at the table directly behind them, and the realization that he might have witnessed her humiliation made her want to sink into the floor. I'm fine, she stammered, her hand unconsciously rising to her cheek where Jules had struck her. The skin there was hot to the touch, and she wondered if a red mark was visible. The man's expression softened further, his eyes filled with a mixture of sympathy and something that looked like anger, though not directed at her. I couldn't help but notice what happened, he said gently, his voice low and soothing. That man who slapped you, was he your son? Eleanor felt a fresh wave of tears threatening to spill over. This kind stranger had witnessed her humiliation, had seen how her own son treated her. But even now, even after everything, she couldn't bring herself to speak ill of Jules. The instinct to protect him, to shield him from judgment, was too deeply ingrained. Yes, he is, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. She could hear the tremble in her own words, but he didn't mean to hurt me. It was my fault, really. I was so clumsy, spilling the wine like that at such an important event. The man shook his head, his eyes filled with a mixture of sympathy and something that looked like anger, though not directed at her. No one deserves to be treated like that, he said firmly, his voice gentle but carrying an undercurrent of steel, especially not by their own child. I would never dream of raising a hand to my mother, no matter what happened. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat as the man introduced himself, extending his hand. I'm Damien Bell, he said, his voice warm and kind. In that moment, Eleanor felt as though the floor had dropped out from beneath her feet. This was Alistair Finch's protégé, one of the very people Jules had been so eager to impress, and he had witnessed everything. Eleanor's mind raced as she stood face to face with Damien Bell. The weight of the situation pressed down on her, making it difficult to breathe. She had to salvage this somehow, for Jules's sake. Mr. Bell, she managed, forcing a smile onto her face. It's a pleasure to meet you. Your mentor seems like a wonderful man. We met him briefly before the event started. Damien's kind eyes never left her face, studying her with an intensity that made Eleanor want to shrink away. "Please, call me Damien," he said softly, his voice warm and reassuring. "And yes, Alistair is a good man. He values honor above all else, in business and in life." Eleanor nodded, her smile wavering. The mention of honor sent a pang through her heart, a sharp reminder of how far her own family had strayed from such ideals. "That's wonderful," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "My son, Jules, he's actually hoping to discuss some important business with your mentor after the event." Damien's expression darkened slightly at the mention of Jules, a flicker of something, disapproval, anger, passing across his features before he quickly schooled them back into a neutral mask. "I see," he said carefully, weighing each word. "And how do you feel about that, Mrs. Sterling?" The question caught Eleanor off guard, like a sudden gust of wind that threatened to knock her off balance. How did she feel? She couldn't remember the last time anyone had asked her that, least of all Jules. The realization sent a wave of sadness washing over her, threatening to drown her in its depths. I'm proud of my son," she said, the words sounding hollow even to her own ears. They hung in the air between them, fragile and unconvincing. "He's worked so hard to build up his father's company." Damien nodded, his eyes never leaving her face. There was a gentleness in his gaze that made Eleanor want to weep, to pour out all the pain and loneliness she had been carrying for so long. "In your role in the company?" he asked softly. Eleanor felt a flush of shame creep up her neck, spreading across her cheeks like wildfire. "Oh no," she admitted, her voice small and uncertain. "I'm afraid I don't know much about the business world. Jules handles all of that." A look of understanding passed over Damien's face, tinged with something that might have been sadness. He opened his mouth as if to say something more, but Eleanor, suddenly aware of how long she'd been gone and fearing Jules's reaction, cut him off. "I'm so sorry, but I really must clean up," she said, gesturing to her stained dress. The wine had begun to dry, leaving a dark, accusing mark on the once beautiful fabric. "My son will be wondering where I am. It was lovely to meet you, Damien. I'm sure we'll see each other again later." Damien nodded, a hint of reluctance in his eyes. "Of course, Mrs. Sterling. Please, take care of yourself." As Eleanor turned to enter the restroom, Damien's voice stopped her once more. "Mrs. Sterling." She looked back at him, her hand on the door handle. "Remember, you have value beyond what others see in you." With those words hanging in the air, Damien turned and walked back towards the event hall, leaving Eleanor standing alone in the corridor, her emotions a tangled mess inside. Inside the restroom, Eleanor stood before the large mirror, the harsh fluorescent lighting accentuating every line on her face, every flaw in her appearance. She dabbed at the wine stain on her dress with a damp paper towel, but the red mark seemed to mock her efforts, spreading further with each attempt to remove it. As she worked, Eleanor's mind wandered back to earlier times when she would accompany her late husband, Arthur, to events like these. She remembered how proud he always was to have her by his side, how he would beam at her as she charmed their business associates with her wit and grace. But those days were long gone, faded like old photographs. Now she was just an embarrassment, a liability to her son's ambitions. Eleanor looked at her reflection, really looked, and saw an aging woman with sagging skin and tired eyes. Gone was the confident, elegant wife of a successful businessman. In her place stood a woman who didn't know how to navigate this world of wealth and power, a woman who had let her son down in every conceivable way. Tears welled up in her eyes as she thought about how she had failed not just Jules, but Arthur as well. When Arthur died 15 years ago, leaving her with a substantial inheritance and a thriving company, she had been lost. She had never worked, never needed to. Arthur had always insisted that her job was to raise their son, to create a loving home, and she had done that, or so she thought. But when it came to managing the company, to growing the wealth Arthur had left them, she had been woefully unprepared. She had used the inheritance to maintain their lifestyle, never thinking about the future, never considering how to make the money work for them. As a result, she had nearly let Arthur's life's work crumble. Eleanor's hands shook as she tried to fix her makeup, wiping away the tear stains and reapplying her eyeliner. The small makeup bag she carried seemed inadequate for the task of repairing not just her appearance, but her dignity. She had to pull herself together. Jules needed her to make a good impression tonight, and despite everything, she was determined not to let him down again. As she stared at her reflection, trying to summon the strength to face the rest of the evening, Eleanor made a silent promise to herself. She would do whatever it took to make things right with Jules, to prove to him that she could be the mother he needed, even if it meant swallowing her pride, even if it meant enduring more of his harsh words and cold demeanor. With a deep breath, Eleanor straightened her shoulders and smoothed down her dress one last time. The wine stain was still visible, a stark reminder of her failings. But there was nothing more she could do about it now. It was time to return to the gala, to face Jules, and to try one more time to be the mother he deserved. Eleanor stepped back into the event hall, her heart pounding in her chest. The room was alive with the soft murmur of conversation and the gentle clink of cutlery against fine china. As she made her way back to their table, she noticed that the stained tablecloth had been replaced with a pristine white one, and fresh cutlery gleamed in the soft light. Jules was already halfway through his steak, his attention focused solely on his plate and the stage where speakers continued to address the crowd. As Eleanor took her seat, she noticed that her wine glass had been replaced with a glass of plain water. Her filet mignon and roasted vegetables sat untouched, steam no longer rising from the plate. She cast a quick glance at the table behind them, catching Damien Bell's eye. He offered her a small, encouraging smile, which she returned with a slight nod before turning back to her own table. Jules, absorbed in his meal and the ongoing presentations, seemed oblivious to the brief interaction. Eleanor picked up her fork, her appetite diminished by the events of the evening, but knowing she should at least make an effort to eat. She took small, careful bites of the filet, barely tasting the expertly prepared dish. Her mind raced with worry about the upcoming meeting with Alistair Finch and how her earlier mishaps might affect Jules's chances of securing the deal. As she ate, she couldn't help but notice how Jules devoured his meal, washing it down with generous sips of red wine, his eyes never leaving the stage, his posture tense with anticipation. Eleanor wondered what thoughts were running through his mind, what strategies he was formulating for the impending business discussion. When Jules finished his meal, a server appeared at their table to collect the plates. "I hope you enjoyed your meal," the young man said politely. "We'll be serving dessert shortly." Jules's eyes flickered to Eleanor's plate, still half full, and he clicked his tongue in disapproval. Eleanor, catching his look, quickly set down her fork. "I'm finished as well," she said softly to the server. "You can take my plate." As the server walked away with their dishes, Jules finally turned his attention to Eleanor. His eyes narrowed as he took in her appearance, lingering on the wine stain that still marred her dress. "The only way you can restore my faith in you," he said, his voice low and cold, "is to make sure you represent me well when we talk with Alistair later. Otherwise, I don't want to see you ever again. You can live alone for as long as you want in that dump in Jersey." Eleanor felt as though she had been struck again, the pain of his words far worse than any physical blow. "Jules," she whispered, her voice trembling, "do you really mean that? It's so cruel." Jules's expression hardened. "You're so helpless," he spat. "I hate burdensome dependence." With that, he turned away, his attention once again fixed on the stage. Eleanor sat in stunned silence, her son's words echoing in her mind. She wanted to cry, to scream, to shake Jules and ask him how he could treat his own mother this way, but she knew she couldn't. She had to stay strong, had to prove to him that she wasn't helpless, that she could be useful. The dessert arrived, a delicate chocolate creation that would have normally delighted Eleanor, but now it sat before her like a mockery of the sweet relationship she had once hoped to have with her son. She noticed that people at other tables were beginning to rise, mingling and networking as the formal dinner portion of the evening came to an end. Jules stood abruptly. "Wait here," he commanded. "I'm going to talk to some people." Don't move, don't talk to anyone. Just sit here and try not to embarrass me any further. As Jules walked away, disappearing into the crowd of well-dressed attendees, Eleanor was left alone at the table. She picked up her dessert spoon with a trembling hand, determined to at least appear composed and elegant. Each tiny bite of the rich chocolate was a struggle, the sweetness turning to ash in her mouth as she fought back tears. She watched as Jules moved confidently from group to group, shaking hands and laughing at jokes she couldn't hear. In that moment, surrounded by the glittering crowd and the sounds of success, Eleanor Sterling had never felt more isolated and out of place. She silently prayed for strength to get through the rest of the evening, hoping against hope that somehow she could still make her son proud. The dinner event gradually wound down, the buzz of conversation growing louder as more guests left their tables to mingle. Eleanor remained seated, following Jules's instructions to the letter, her barely touched dessert a silent testament to her anxiety. She watched as her son navigated the room with ease, his charm and confidence on full display as he shook hands and exchanged pleasantries with various influential figures. After what felt like an eternity, Jules made his way back to their table. His expression was unreadable as he approached, but Eleanor could sense a mix of anticipation and tension radiating from him. "Well," Jules said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "it's just like you to sit here nicely and quietly, not using this opportunity to network at all." Eleanor's heart sank. "But Jules, you told me to stay here." "Ambitious people know how to carry themselves," Jules cut her off. "They don't just stay quiet when someone tells them to be quiet. They know what to do, how to make the most of every situation." Eleanor bit her lip, trying to contain the hurt and frustration that threatened to spill over. She wanted to argue, to defend herself, but she knew it would only make things worse. Instead, she took a deep breath, steeling herself for whatever was to come next. As she was about to respond, she caught sight of a familiar figure approaching from behind Jules. Alastair Finch, his silver hair gleaming in the soft light of the ballroom, was making his way towards their table. Eleanor's eyes widened, and she quickly raised a finger to her lips, silently urging Jules to be quiet. Jules, misinterpreting her gesture, scowled, clearly about to berate her again. But before he could speak, Alastair's warm voice rang out behind him. "Julian, Mrs. Sterling, I hope you've enjoyed the evening so far." In an instant, Jules's demeanor changed. He turned, a broad smile plastered on his face, all traces of his previous anger vanishing as if they had never existed. "Mr. Finch, yes, it's been a wonderful event. Thank you so much for having us." Eleanor stood, smoothing down her dress and hoping the wine stain wasn't too noticeable in the dim light. She extended her hand to Alastair, grateful for his kind smile. "It's been lovely, Mr. Finch. Thank you for your hospitality." Alastair shook her hand warmly, his eyes twinkling. "Please call me Alastair. I'm glad you've enjoyed yourselves, Julian. I believe you mentioned wanting to discuss some business?" Jules nodded eagerly. "Yes, if you have the time, I'd love to talk about some potential collaborations and venture opportunities." Of course, Alastair said. "Why don't we move to one of the private rooms for a bit more privacy? It's getting rather loud in here." As Alastair spoke, Eleanor noticed another figure joining their group. Her heart skipped a beat as she recognized Damien Bell, his kind eyes meeting hers for a brief moment before he turned to his mentor. "Alastair, is this the Sterling family you mentioned?" Damien asked, his voice carefully neutral. Alastair beamed. "Indeed it is. Julian, Mrs. Sterling, this is Damien Bell. He'll be joining us for our discussion, if that's all right with you." Jules' smile faltered for just a moment, but he quickly recovered. "Of course, that would be wonderful. The more the merrier, right, Mom?" Eleanor, sensing Jules's discomfort, quickly spoke up. "It's lovely to meet you, Damien. Your mentor speaks very highly of you." Damien's eyes met hers again, a flicker of concern passing through them. "Actually, Mrs. Sterling and I met briefly earlier outside the restrooms." Jules's head whipped around, his eyes wide with barely concealed panic. Eleanor felt her heart race, wondering what Damien might say next. But Damien simply smiled. It was a pleasure to make your acquaintance, Mrs. Sterling. I'm looking forward to our discussion. Alistair clapped his hands together. Excellent. Shall we move to the VIP lounge then? It's just down the corridor. Jules, seemingly relieved that Damien hadn't mentioned anything about the incident he had witnessed, nodded enthusiastically. That sounds perfect. Mom, why don't you stay here and enjoy the rest of the event? We wouldn't want to bore you with business talk. But Alistair shook his head. Nonsense. Mrs. Sterling must join us. After all, this involves her late husband's company, doesn't it? Family ventures should involve the whole family, in my opinion. Jules's smile became strained, but he nodded in agreement. Of course you're right. Mom, please join us. As they made their way out of the event hall and towards the VIP lounge, Eleanor couldn't help but notice how Damien held the door open for all of them, his manners impeccable. She thought sadly of how Jules had never shown her such courtesy. The small group entered the VIP lounge, its plush furnishings and subdued lighting, creating an atmosphere of exclusivity and importance. As they settled into the comfortable leather chairs, Eleanor took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. She knew that this meeting could change everything for Jules, for better or worse. And somehow she sensed that her role in this discussion might be more crucial than she could have ever imagined. The VIP lounge exuded an air of quiet opulence, with its rich mahogany paneling and soft amber lighting. As they settled into the plush leather chairs arranged around a polished conference table, Eleanor couldn't help but feel out of place. She perched on the edge of her seat, hands clasped tightly in her lap, acutely aware of the wine stain on her dress and the weight of expectation hanging in the air. Jules, by contrast, seemed to come alive in this setting. He leaned forward eagerly, his eyes bright with anticipation, as he addressed Alistair Finch. Mr. Finch, thank you again for taking the time to meet with us. I believe there's a tremendous opportunity for collaboration between our organizations. Sterling Enterprises is on the cusp of innovation. Alistair nodded, his expression neutral but attentive. I'm always interested in potential alliances, Julian. Why don't you tell us more about what you have in mind? Jules launched into his pitch, his voice confident and passionate. As he spoke about his company's successes over the past few years, he detailed the market trends they had capitalized on, the disruptive strategies they had implemented, and the impressive returns they had seen. As he spoke, he pulled out his tablet, swiping through slides of graphs and charts that illustrated his points. As you can see, Mr. Finch, Jules said, his eyes gleaming with pride, we've managed to increase our market share by 20% in the last 2 quarters alone. With your expertise in venture capital and our unparalleled access to cutting-edge innovation, I believe we could create a new industrial frontier. Throughout Jules's presentation, Eleanor remained silent, feeling increasingly out of her depth. The business jargon and financial terms Jules used so effortlessly might as well have been a foreign language to her. She tried to follow along, to show interest and engagement, but she could feel her confusion mounting with each passing minute. After Jules had finished his pitch, laying out his vision for a potential new venture, Alistair turned to Eleanor. His kind eyes met hers, and she felt a flutter of anxiety in her stomach. Mrs. Sterling, Alistair said, his voice gentle but firm. What are your thoughts on this? Do you fully support your son's vision? Eleanor felt as though she had been thrown into icy water. She opened her mouth, then closed it again at a loss for words. Jules shot her a warning glance, but Alistair's raised hand stopped him from speaking on her behalf. I want to hear from Eleanor, Alistair said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Swallowing hard, Eleanor forced herself to speak. I trust my son's judgment, she said, her voice trembling slightly. He has worked tirelessly and diligently. Alistair nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving Eleanor's face. She had the uncomfortable feeling that he could see right through her facade, could sense her discomfort and lack of understanding. Eleanor, Alistair said, leaning forward slightly, how much are you involved in the company's decision-making processes? The question hung in the air, heavy and unexpected. Jules shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable with this line of questioning. Eleanor felt a bead of sweat form on her brow as she struggled to find an appropriate answer. Well, you see, she stammered, looking to Jules for help, but her son's face was a mask of barely concealed irritation. Jules cleared his throat, attempting to take control of the conversation. Mr. Finch, if I may, my mother has very little involvement in the day-to-day operations of the company. She's not accustomed to the tech world, so I've been the one spearheading our success and building on my father's legacy. Alistair's eyebrows rose slightly at this. I see, he said, his tone neutral. And after your father passed away, Julian, did you not think it important to help your mother transition into management? It is a family venture, after all. Shouldn't it be a joint effort? Jules's confident demeanor faltered for a moment. With all due respect, Mr. Finch, that's a family decision. Given my mother's limited knowledge, starting from scratch would have taken too much time. She's not as young as she used to be. Alistair let out a short laugh, though there was little humor in it. My boy, that excuse might offend me. I'm not exactly a spring chicken myself, but I'm still capable of learning new things every day. The atmosphere in the room had shifted, becoming tense and uncomfortable. Jules's earlier confidence was rapidly evaporating, replaced by a growing sense of unease. He glanced at Eleanor, as if suddenly remembering her presence, before turning back to Alistair. Mr. Finch, Jules said, his voice tight with barely contained frustration, I'm not sure I understand. We came here to discuss a potential business partnership. Why are we talking about my family arrangements? Alistair leaned back in his chair, exchanging a significant look with Damien. The younger Belle had been silent throughout the exchange, but his eyes had never left Eleanor, watching her reactions with a mixture of sympathy and concern. Julian, Alistair said, his voice grave, I'm afraid we need to have a different kind of conversation. You see, Damien told me about the incident he witnessed earlier this evening. He said let's just say you chastised your mother a little too forcefully on the cheek. Jules's face drained of color, his eyes widening in shock. Eleanor felt her heart drop, realizing that the moment she had been dreading had finally arrived. The carefully constructed facade they had built for this meeting was crumbling before her eyes, and she was powerless to stop it. As the truth of their family dynamics began to unravel in that opulent VIP lounge, Eleanor Sterling found herself at a crossroads. The choices made in the next few moments would shape not just the future of their company, but the very fabric of their family. And for the first time in years, she felt a spark of something long forgotten, the courage to speak her truth. The tension in the VIP lounge was suffocating, the air thick with unspoken accusations. Jules sat stiffly, his confidence crumbling as his gaze flickered between Alistair, Damien, and Eleanor, searching for an escape. Eleanor felt a strange mix of dread and relief. Dread for the inevitable confrontation, relief that the charade was finally over. Jules's shock dissolved into fury. He turned to Eleanor, his eyes burning with betrayal. Mom, what did you do? He hissed, voice low and sharp. What did you tell them? Before she could answer, Alistair raised a hand, silencing him with a hard stare. Your mother didn't say a word, Julian. She didn't have to. Damien saw everything. He sat just behind you at dinner. The slap, the cruel words, nothing escaped his notice. Jules's face paled further, if that was possible. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. For once, the silver-tongued businessman was at a loss. Eleanor, seeing the distress in her son's eyes, despite everything, felt the familiar urge to protect him stir within her. She leaned forward, her hands gripping tightly in her lap to hide their trembling. Mr. Finch, please, she began, her voice soft but steady. I know what Damien saw must have looked awful, but you have to understand, Jules has been under so much pressure. He's worked so hard to build his father's company, and tonight's event. She trailed off, seeing the look of disappointment on Alistair's face. Damien, who had been silent until now, spoke up, his voice gentle but firm. Mrs. Sterling, he said, you don't have to make excuses for him. No amount of pressure justifies treating someone, let alone one's own mother, the way Jules treated you tonight. Jules, having regained some of his composure, straightened in his chair, his businessman's mask slipping back into place, though it was noticeably strained. Mr. Finch, I apologize if there's been some misunderstanding. What happens in my family is private. I assure you it has no bearing on my ability to run a successful business or to be a valuable partner to your company. Alistair nodded slowly, considering Jules's words. He exchanged a look with Damien, a silent communication passing between mentor and protege. After a moment, he turned back to Jules and Eleanor. I understand your position, Julian, Alistair said, his voice measured, and I appreciate your mother's desire to protect you and your father's legacy. However, I'm afraid I can't simply overlook what's happened, especially given what our analysts have uncovered. Jules's brow furrowed. Analysts? What are you talking about? Damien leaned forward, his expression serious. We always do our due diligence before entering into major alliances, Julian. In reviewing your company's financial portfolio, we discovered that you bought out your mother's stake in the company some years ago for significantly less than market value. Eleanor's eyes widened in shock. She knew Jules had taken control of the company and had given her a sum of money, but she hadn't realized he had completely bought her out. The memory of signing those documents Jules had placed in front of her, documents she hadn't fully understood at the time, came rushing back. Jules's face hardened, a flicker of defiance in his eyes. Are you saying you're going to terminate our potential partnership over a private family matter and a simple financial transaction? Alistair held up a hand. Not necessarily. There will be conditions. He paused, making sure he had Jules's full attention. Effective immediately, all discussions between our organizations will be suspended, Alistair said. Disappointment and anger warred in Jules's expression, but before he could protest, Alistair held up a hand. However, he added, we are willing to reconsider our partnership on 3 non-negotiable conditions. He turned to look directly at Eleanor, his eyes kind but resolute. First, Mrs. Sterling must be fully involved in the company's management from this point forward. You will teach her, train her, and guide her in all aspects of the business. Second, Damien added, Mrs. Sterling's equity in the company must be restored to a level that reflects her historical contribution and current market value. Jules's jaw dropped in disbelief. You can't be serious, he sputtered. She doesn't know anything about running a company. She's the reason I had to step in and save the business in the first place. Those financial transactions were completely legal. Eleanor flinched at his words, the truth of them stinging despite their harshness. Jules, she said softly, that's because I didn't know anything about the tech world. I just didn't understand how to make the company grow or maintain it myself. Now knowing, it was her responsibility to honor her late husband's efforts. Alistair's expression softened slightly at Eleanor's words. This is precisely why these conditions are non-negotiable, Julian. Your mother needs to be involved to understand the venture she's a part of. This isn't just about making money. It's about preserving a legacy, a family legacy. Jules shook his head, frustration evident in every line of his body. Why is this so important to you? It's our company, our family. Why do you care how we run it? Alistair leaned forward, his eyes intense. Because, Julian, how someone treats their family is a direct reflection of their character. Your dedication to teaching and involving your mother in the venture will show us your dedication and steadfastness in maintaining our business relationship. To me, that's as valuable as any contract or guarantee. He paused, letting his words sink in. This belief system extends to my own family and to everyone I do business with. I've learned that you can tell a lot about a person and a company by looking at their family dynamics. The room fell silent as Alistair's words hung in the air. Jules sat still, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. Eleanor felt a surge of something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Hope that things might change, that she might have a chance to understand the venture her husband had built, that she and Jules might rebuild their relationship. Finally, Jules spoke, his voice strained but determined. All right, I'll do it. I'll teach my mother about the business, involve her in the management, and ensure she has the support and knowledge to succeed. Alistair nodded, satisfied. He produced a document from his briefcase. I'll need you both to sign this. It's an agreement reflecting our new terms, including Mrs. Sterling's involvement in the company and the equitable distribution of company shares. As Jules and Eleanor signed the document, Alistair added one final condition. There's one more thing, Julian, he said, his tone unwavering. When we return to the main hall, you will make a public announcement. You will apologize to your mother in front of everyone for your behavior tonight and pledge to involve her fully in your company. Jules's head snapped up, his eyes wide with disbelief. You can't be serious. That would ruin my reputation. What does all this have to do with our business alliance? Are you trying to blackmail me? But Alistair was unmoved. It's non-negotiable. Eleanor showed nothing but kindness. And as Damien can attest, you owe her this apology. Eleanor, overwhelmed by the turn of events, found her voice. I would appreciate that, Jules. Damien, who had been quietly observing, added, and for this venture to work, we'll be posting a liaison from our company and yours to ensure these conditions are met. Jules laughed humorlessly, shaking his head at the audacity of it all, but in the end, he nodded. Fine. Whatever it takes. I'll do it. As they prepared to return to the main hall, Eleanor felt a mix of emotions swirling within her. Fear of the public spectacle to come, hope for a better future, and a tiny spark of something she hadn't felt in years, the beginnings of self-respect. Whatever happened next, she knew that tonight had marked a turning point. For better or worse, nothing would ever be the same again. The group made their way back to the main event hall, the sound of conversation and clinking glasses growing louder as they approached. Eleanor's heart pounded in her chest, a mix of anticipation and dread coursing through her veins. Jules walked stiffly beside her, his jaw clenched, the muscle twitching beneath his skin, a clear sign of his inner turmoil. As they reached the grand doors, Eleanor took a deep breath, knowing that whatever lay ahead would forever change the delicate balance between mother and son. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in years, she felt ready to face it. The doors to the ballroom loomed, a glittering threshold to what felt like a public reckoning. Eleanor could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes, or at least what she imagined would feel like hundreds of eyes boring into her. She focused on breathing, trying to quell the frantic flutter of her pulse. As they stepped back into the ballroom, the murmur of conversation washed over them. Jules stopped just inside the entrance, his hand gripping Eleanor's arm a little too tightly. He scanned the room, his expression a mixture of defiance and resignation. Are you ready for this? Eleanor asked softly, her voice barely audible above the din. Jules didn't answer, his gaze still fixed on some distant point in the crowd. After a moment, he took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and raised his hand, signaling for attention. A hush fell over the room as people turned to see what was happening. Jules cleared his throat, his voice amplified by the sound system. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his tone formal and strained, I have an announcement to make. Eleanor's heart pounded in her chest. She squeezed Jules's hand, offering him what little support she could. Earlier this evening, Jules continued, his gaze sweeping over the crowd, there was an incident, a private matter that occurred between my mother and me. A murmur rippled through the room as people exchanged curious glances. Eleanor could feel her cheeks burning with embarrassment, but she forced herself to stand tall to meet the gazes of the assembled guests. Jules paused, his jaw clenching. He looked down at Eleanor, his expression softening slightly. I acted inappropriately towards my mother, and for that, I am deeply sorry. The words seemed to catch in his throat, as if they were physically painful for him to utter. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. It wasn't the most eloquent apology, but it was a start. It was more than she had ever expected to hear from him. Mom, Jules said, his voice now laced with a hint of sincerity, I'm sorry. I was wrong, and I shouldn't have treated you that way. He reached out and took her hand, his grip surprisingly gentle. Tonight, I want to publicly acknowledge my mother, Eleanor Sterling, and to welcome her as a full partner in Sterling Enterprises. A smattering of applause broke out in the room, growing louder as people realized the significance of Jules's words. Eleanor felt a wave of relief wash over her, mingled with a sense of gratitude and hope. My mother has always been a source of strength and inspiration to me, Jules continued, his voice now sounding more genuine, and I realized that I haven't always appreciated her contributions. That changes tonight. He turned to face Eleanor fully, his eyes meeting hers. Mom, I promise to involve you in all aspects of the business, to listen to your advice, and to value your input. You deserve to be a part of this, and I'm grateful to have you by my side. Tears streamed down Eleanor's face as she hugged Jules tightly. Thank you, Jules, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Thank you. As the applause swelled, Alastair Finch stepped forward, his eyes twinkling with approval. Well said, Julian, he boomed, his voice carrying across the room. That's the kind of leadership we need to see more of. He raised his glass in a toast. To the Sterling family, and to a bright future together. The crowd echoed his toast, raising their glasses in unison. Eleanor felt a sense of warmth and belonging she hadn't experienced in years. She looked around the room, taking in the smiling faces, the glittering lights, the sounds of celebration. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she truly belonged. As the evening progressed, Eleanor found herself engaged in conversations with various guests, discussing everything from art and music to technology and finance. She was surprised to discover how much she had to offer, how her life experiences and insights could be valuable in unexpected ways. Jules, to his credit, stayed by her side, introducing her to people, explaining the nuances of the business world, and making her feel like an equal partner. Damien Bell also made a point of spending time with Eleanor, sharing his own perspectives on leadership and mentorship. He was kind, insightful, and genuinely interested in her thoughts and opinions. As they spoke, Eleanor felt a growing sense of respect and admiration for the young man. Later in the evening, as the gala was winding down, Alastair Finch approached Jules and Eleanor, a satisfied smile on his face. I must say, Julian, he said, you've exceeded my expectations. I'm truly impressed by your willingness to make amends and to embrace your mother as a full partner in your company. He turned to Eleanor, his eyes twinkling. And Mrs. Sterling, I'm delighted to see you taking your rightful place at the helm. I have no doubt that you'll bring a valuable perspective to the table. Thank you, Mr. Finch, Eleanor said, returning his smile. I'm eager to learn and to contribute in any way I can. In that case, Alastair said, I have a proposition for you. I'm looking for someone to serve on the advisory board of my foundation, which supports innovative ventures in underserved communities. Given your life experiences and your newfound involvement in the business world, I think you'd be a perfect fit. Eleanor's eyes widened in surprise. I don't know what to say, she stammered. I'm honored, but I'm not sure I'm qualified. Nonsense, Alastair said. You have a unique perspective and a wealth of wisdom to share. I have no doubt you'd be a valuable asset to the board. Think about it, and let me know your decision. As Alastair walked away, Jules turned to Eleanor, his expression a mixture of pride and amazement. Mom, that's incredible, he said. You'd be amazing on that board. Eleanor smiled, feeling a sense of accomplishment she hadn't experienced in years. I don't know, Jules, she said. It's a big responsibility. I know you can do it, Mom, Jules said, his voice filled with sincerity. You're smarter and more capable than you give yourself credit for. And besides, he added with a wink, I'll be there to support you every step of the way. As they left the majestic ballroom that evening, Eleanor felt like a different person. The humiliation and self-doubt that had plagued her for so long had begun to fade away, replaced by a newfound sense of confidence and purpose. She had faced her fears, spoken her truth, and emerged stronger and more resilient than ever before. Jules, too, seemed to have undergone a transformation. He was more attentive, more respectful, and more genuinely engaged with Eleanor than she had ever remembered. He had learned a valuable lesson about the importance of family, the power of humility, and the true meaning of success. As their limousine glided through the streets of New York City, Eleanor reached out and took Jules's hand. "Thank you, Jules," she said softly, "for everything." Jules squeezed her hand in return, his eyes meeting hers. "Thank you, Mom," he said, "for giving me a second chance." The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Eleanor Sterling felt a sense of hope and optimism. She knew that there would be challenges ahead, but she was ready to face them, together with her son, as a family. And as she gazed out the window at the twinkling lights of the city, she knew that anything was possible. The liaison sent to work with the Sterling organization was Damien Bell. He ensured things were going smoothly and that all contracts and transactions were fair and benefited both parties. He oversaw this for approximately 6 months. He found himself becoming close to the Sterling family, and Jules in particular was acting as a new person. At the 6-month milestone, Eleanor was meeting regularly with an executive team of her choosing, and she had absorbed more information than Jules thought possible. In fact, on more than one occasion, Eleanor's business savviness had saved Jules from making a bad business decision. The dynamic had truly shifted. The pair now were two partners that complemented one another. Not only that, the two genuinely enjoyed spending time together as a result. One evening, Damien was invited to the Sterling home. He was in the middle of a business discussion with Jules. He listened intently as the two expertly discussed an upcoming merger. They were about to close the discussion when Eleanor walked in and said, "Gentlemen, I suggest you consider the impact of that merger on this particular community. This would be an area where we would have significant holdings and may have the chance to give back." Damien thought to himself that this woman was a natural leader. She had the mind to lead with both the business and human perspective in focus. Damien smiled. "I think that's a great perspective. What are your thoughts?" "Well, I know many are excited about this new prospect, and many may not be. The new business could price some community members out of their homes. I believe in the power of growth. Growth for everyone. So I would like to fund affordable housing options for anyone affected by the merger." "I think that's a great idea," said Jules. As they looked at each other, Damien was glad he had the opportunity to bear witness. "Excellent. So it is decided." And so they were on to the next item of business as a team that a year passed, and Sterling Enterprises flourished under the combined leadership of Jules and Eleanor. Jules, humbled by his past mistakes, had fully embraced his mother as an equal partner, valuing her wisdom and insights. Eleanor, in turn, had blossomed into a confident and capable business leader, bringing a unique perspective and a deep commitment to social responsibility to the company. One crisp autumn afternoon, Jules found himself reflecting on the events of the past year. He sat in his office, gazing out the window at the vibrant cityscape, a sense of gratitude and contentment washing over him. His professional life was thriving, his relationship with his mother had never been stronger, and he had finally learned the true meaning of success. He picked up his phone and dialed Eleanor's number. "Mom," he said, his voice filled with warmth. "Do you have a few minutes? I wanted to talk to you about something." "Of course, Jules," Eleanor said, her voice cheerful. "What's on your mind?" "I was just thinking about everything that's happened over the past year," Jules said, "and I wanted to thank you again for giving me a second chance. I know I don't say it often enough, but I'm truly grateful for everything you've done for me." Eleanor chuckled softly. "Oh, Jules," she said, "you don't have to thank me. I'm just glad that we're finally working together as a family." "That's exactly what I wanted to talk to you about," Jules said. "I was thinking, how would you feel about changing the name of the company?" There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. Then Eleanor spoke, her voice choked with emotion. "Oh, Jules," she said, "that's the most wonderful thing anyone has ever said to me." "I mean it, Mom," Jules said, his voice sincere. "You deserve to have your name on the company. You've earned it." "Well," Eleanor said, her voice trembling slightly, "if you're sure." "I'm sure, Mom," Jules said, smiling. "I can't think of a better way to honor you and everything you've done for this company." "Then I would be honored," Eleanor said, her voice filled with joy. "It sounds perfect." "Great," Jules said. "I'll start the paperwork right away. We can make the official announcement at the holiday gala next month. That sounds wonderful, Jules, Eleanor said. I can't wait. As Jules hung up the phone, he felt a profound sense of peace and fulfillment. He had finally found his purpose in life, not just in building a successful company, but in honoring his family and giving back to his community. And he knew that with his mother by his side, anything was possible. The holiday gala arrived, a glittering celebration of the year's successes and a promise of even greater things to come. The majestic ballroom was transformed into a winter wonderland, with sparkling lights, towering Christmas trees, and the sweet scent of pine filling the air. Jules and Eleanor stood side by side on the stage, addressing the assembled guests. Eleanor, radiant in a stunning silver gown, spoke first, thanking everyone for their hard work and dedication. This past year has been a journey of growth, not just for our company, but for our family, she said, her voice filled with warmth. And I'm incredibly proud of everything we've accomplished together. Jules stepped forward, his eyes meeting Eleanor's. And now, he said, I have a special announcement to make. In honor of my mother, Eleanor Sterling, and her invaluable contributions to our company, we will be changing our name to Sterling Voss Sterling Enterprises, effective immediately. The crowd erupted in applause, a chorus of cheers and congratulations filling the room. Eleanor beamed, her heart swelling with pride and gratitude. This isn't just a name change, Jules continued, his voice ringing with sincerity. It's a symbol of our commitment to family, to honor, and to building a better future for all. As the applause subsided, Jules raised his glass in a toast. To Sterling Voss Sterling Enterprises, he said, and to a bright future together. The crowd echoed his toast, raising their glasses in unison. Eleanor felt a sense of joy and fulfillment she had never known before. She had finally found her place, not just in the company, but in her son's heart. And as she looked around the room at the smiling faces of her friends, her colleagues, and her family, she knew that she had finally found her true purpose in life. In the years that followed, Sterling Voss Sterling Enterprises continued to thrive, becoming a model of ethical business practices and social responsibility. Jules and Eleanor worked side by side, building a company that was not only successful, but also meaningful, a company that made a positive impact on the world. And as they looked back on the events of that fateful evening at the gala, they knew that it had been a turning point, a moment of reckoning that had ultimately led them to a place of greater understanding, greater respect, and greater love. It was a story of redemption, of second chances, and of the transformative power of family. A reminder that sometimes the greatest successes come from the most unexpected places. And so, the legacy of Sterling Voss Sterling Enterprises lived on, a testament to the enduring power of family, the importance of ethical leadership, and the unwavering belief that anything is possible when we work together with love, with respect, and with a shared vision for a better future. 9-8S. Cantine. As time marched forward, the impact of Eleanor's guidance became even more pronounced. Sterling Voss Sterling Enterprises diversified its portfolio, not just focusing on disruptive tech, but also investing in sustainable energy solutions and community development projects. Jules found himself relying more and more on Eleanor's intuition, her ability to see beyond the numbers and understand the human impact of their decisions. One day, Jules approached Eleanor with a troubled look on his face. "Mom," he said, "we've been offered a lucrative deal, a chance to acquire a major stake in a global manufacturing company. But there's something about it that doesn't sit right with me." Eleanor looked at him intently, her eyes filled with concern. "What is it, Jules?" "The company has a history of environmental violations," Jules admitted. "They've been accused of polluting local waterways and exploiting their workers." Eleanor's face clouded with disapproval. "Then we can't do it, Jules," she said firmly. "No matter how profitable it may be, we can't compromise our values. We have a responsibility to protect the environment and to treat people with respect." Jules sighed. "I know, Mom," he said, "but it's such a big opportunity. It could take us to the next level." "There will be other opportunities, Jules," Eleanor said, opportunities that align with our values. We don't need to sacrifice our integrity for the sake of profit. Jules looked at his mother, his heart filled with gratitude. He knew she was right. He had learned his lesson about the true meaning of success, and he wasn't willing to compromise his values for anything. "You're right, Mom," he said. "We'll pass on the deal." And so, Sterling Voss Sterling Enterprises continued to chart its own course, guided by its commitment to ethical business practices and social responsibility. The company became a beacon of hope, inspiring other businesses to follow suit and demonstrating that it was possible to be both successful and ethical. As Eleanor grew older, she began to transition more of her responsibilities to Jules, but she remained a constant presence in the company, offering her guidance and wisdom. She also became a prominent philanthropist, using her wealth and influence to support causes she cared about, from education and healthcare to environmental protection and social justice. One evening, as Jules and Eleanor sat together in her study, surrounded by books and mementos, Jules looked at his mother, his heart filled with love and admiration. "Mom," he said, "I don't know what I would have done without you. You've taught me so much, not just about business, but about life." Eleanor smiled, her eyes twinkling. "Oh, Jules," she said, "you give me too much credit. You had it in you all along. You just needed a little nudge in the right direction." "Well, I'm grateful for that nudge," Jules said, "and I promise to carry on your legacy, to always do what's right, and to never forget the importance of family." Eleanor reached out and took Jules's hand, her grip still strong despite her age. "I know you will, Jules," she said. "I have complete faith in you." And so, the story of Jules and Eleanor Sterling continued, a testament to the enduring power of love, forgiveness, and the unwavering belief that anything is possible when we work together, with honor, with integrity, and with a shared commitment to making the world a better place. The ripple effects of that fateful evening at the gala continued to spread, touching countless lives and inspiring generations to come. And as the sun set on their remarkable journey, Jules and Eleanor knew that they had created something truly special, something that would endure long after they were gone. Their company had truly stood the test of time,